Later on at 4:47 p.m., a diesel truck driver named Marcus Chen pulled into a Chevron station off the 101 in Los Angeles. He'd driven this route for 12 years. Same station, same pump. But when the numbers on the screen stopped rolling, something was different. $6.89 per gallon. He stared at it. Then he looked at the final total, $412 to fill his tank. He took a photo, posted it to his trucking group chat with 3 words. This is just beginning. Marcus was right. This is not about one truck driver paying more at one gas station. This is about California losing nearly 300,000 barrels per day of refining capacity in less than 15 months. And what that means for every single person who drives in this state. Here is what we know for certain. Phillips 66 closed its Los Angeles refinery in October 2025. That facility produced 139,000 barrels per day. Valero just confirmed 3 days ago it will idle its Benicia refinery by April 2026. That's another 145,000 barrels per day. Combined, these 2 closures eliminate 284,000 barrels of daily production capacity. That represents 17% of California's total refining capacity. 17%. When companies of this scale make closure decisions within months of each other, it means something systemic has broken. Phillips 66 didn't announce this closure with fanfare. They issued a press release on October 16, 2024. Valero waited until April 16, 2025. Both used similar language. Strategic alternatives, challenging regulatory environment, long-term sustainability. What they didn't say is more important than what they did. California currently has 13 operating refineries with a combined capacity of 1.6 million barrels per day. After these closures, that number drops to 1.48 million barrels per day. The state consumes approximately 1.4 million barrels per day. Do the math. That leaves an 8% buffer between what California uses and what California can produce. 8%. One refinery fire. One unplanned maintenance issue. One supply disruption. That's all it takes. Republican Congressman Vince Fong from Bakersfield called this a national security risk in December 2025. He wasn't being hyperbolic. California produces fuel for military bases, naval operations, and defense logistics throughout the West Coast. When your domestic refining capacity drops below your consumption rate, you become dependent on imports. And here's the problem. California doesn't use regular gasoline. California uses CARBOB. CARBOB stands for California Reformulated Gasoline Blendstock for oxygenate blending. It's a specialty fuel blend required by state law to reduce air pollution. Only California uses it. That means refineries in Texas can't just ship gasoline here. Refineries in Louisiana can't fill the gap. The fuel has to meet California's exact specifications. As of November 2025, California's gasoline imports have already exceeded totals for any year since at least 2004. The state is importing fuel from South Korea, from Singapore, from India. Fuel that travels 8,000 miles across the Pacific Ocean to reach Los Angeles ports. This makes California what energy analysts call a fuel island. There are no inbound fuel pipelines from other states. Every drop of gasoline either comes from California refineries or arrives by ship. When supply tightens, prices spike. When refineries close, the island gets smaller. But behind closed doors, industry insiders are sharing a very different story than what you're hearing from state officials. There are 5 interconnected forces driving this crisis. Each one alone would strain the system. Together, they create what one energy economist called a cascading fuel supply failure. First, California's low-carbon fuel standard, enacted in 2009 and significantly strengthened in 2025, requires refineries to reduce the carbon intensity of their fuel by 30% below 2010 baseline levels by 2030. That jumps to 90% by 2045. Compliance with LCFS costs refineries money. How much depends on credit prices? In 2025, LCFS credit prices hovered around $70 to $200 per metric ton. Phillips 66 and Valero both cited LCFS compliance costs as factors in their closure decisions. Stillwater Publications, an energy market research firm, documented in December 2025 that both companies explicitly mentioned LCFS among the reasons for shutting down California operations. Valero's CEO described California as having the most stringent and difficult regulatory environment in North America. That's a direct quote from the company's April 2025 announcement. When a refinery that has operated for decades suddenly becomes unprofitable to run, the regulations have changed the economic equation. Second, California has banned the can in 70s. In 1980, California had roughly 50 refineries. By January 1st, 2025, that number dropped to 13. But here's what's important. Refining capacity only dropped 30% during that same period. The remaining refineries got bigger, more efficient, more consolidated. Now 2 of those large facilities are closing. There's no mechanism to replace them. State law prohibits building new refineries. Federal regulations make expanding existing facilities prohibitively expensive. California Policy Center documented in April 2025 that starting in 2026, California's total refining capacity will drop to 1,483,000 barrels per day against consumption of 1.4 million barrels per day. That's a 16% buffer. Then subtract another 145,000 barrels when Valero closes. The buffer vanishes. Third, California's electricity grid is transitioning away from natural gas power generation toward renewable energy. This is accelerating the closure of natural gas infrastructure that refineries depend on. Refineries use massive amounts of natural gas for heating, processing, and steam generation. As the state phases out natural gas connections for new construction and pushes electrification mandates, the long-term viability of gas-dependent industrial facilities becomes uncertain. Phillips 66's Los Angeles refinery operated for decades on natural gas infrastructure. That infrastructure is aging. Replacing it requires billion-dollar investments. When you combine that capital requirement with tightening regulations and shrinking profit margins, the business case collapses. Fourth, California crude oil production has declined 65% since its peak in the mid-1980s. The state currently produces less crude oil than it consumes. That means refineries import crude oil from other states, from Alaska, from foreign sources. Imported crude costs more to transport. It's subject to global price fluctuations. It adds logistical complexity. Stanford Law School published research in August 2025 showing that California's in-state crude production dropped from 2.38 million barrels per day in the mid-1980s to current levels below 1 million barrels per day. As domestic production declines, refineries become less economically competitive. Fifth, the consolidation of California's refining sector means fewer companies control more market share. Valero, PBF Energy, and Marathon. When one company closes a refinery, it doesn't just remove capacity. It removes competition. Fewer refineries mean less price competition. It also means less supply flexibility when disruptions occur. In October 2025, a fire at Chevron's El Segundo refinery sent shockwaves through California's gasoline market. Prices spiked immediately because there weren't enough alternative suppliers to absorb the lost production. Each of these factors alone would create pressure on California's fuel supply system. Together, they create mathematical impossibility. You cannot lose 17% of refining capacity, operate on an 8% supply buffer, face the highest compliance costs in North America, prohibit new refinery construction, and rely on specialty fuel that only California uses without eventually hitting a breaking point. So what happens next? Let me walk you through 3 scenarios based on current data and industry projections. Best case scenario. California aggressively expands fuel import infrastructure in the next 6 months. The state negotiates emergency waivers to temporarily allow non-CRBOB gasoline during supply shortages. Legislature fast-tracks permits for refinery expansions at existing facilities. Valero delays its Benicia closure while importing gasoline to maintain supply, which the company announced it would do on January 7, 2026. Governor Newsom's office stated that Valero will continue importing gasoline into Northern California beyond April once the refinery fully idles. Under this scenario, gas prices stabilize around $5 to $6 per gallon. Occasional spikes occur during summer driving season or when refineries go offline for maintenance, but the system doesn't collapse. The trade-off is California becomes permanently dependent on imported fuel, which means exposure to global price volatility and supply chain disruptions. Base case scenario. Current trends continue. Valero closes Benicia in April 2026 as planned. California's refining capacity drops to 1.34 million barrels per day. Consumption remains at 1.4 million barrels per day. The state imports approximately 100,000 barrels per day to cover the gap. Gas prices rise to the range predicted by USC Marshall School of Business professor Michael Misg in May 2025. Between $7.35 and $8.
Spike within days. Subscribe to their email alerts. Knowledge gives you lead time. Second, calculate your household's gasoline budget at $8 per gallon. Not $5, not $6, $8. If that number is unaffordable, you need to start making changes now, not when prices actually hit $8. Consider carpooling arrangements with coworkers. Explore public transportation options. Look at your vehicle's fuel efficiency. A car that gets 20 miles per gallon costs twice as much to operate as one that gets 40 miles per gallon. Third, contact your state representatives. Tell them this issue matters to you. California State Assembly and Senate members respond to constituent pressure. The more people who call, email, and show up at town halls, the more urgently legislators treat the issue. Ask them specifically what they're doing to prevent fuel shortages. Ask them about emergency plans for supply disruptions. Demand answers. Fourth, build a financial buffer. If your monthly gas budget is currently $200, start setting aside an additional $200 per month now. By April 2026, when Valero closes, you'll have a cushion to absorb price increases without cutting other essentials. Fifth, support local businesses that will be impacted. Small delivery companies, independent contractors, and service providers have thin margins. When their costs spike, some will close. If there's a local business you value, give them your business now. Loyalty matters when economic pressure hits. Sixth, document what you're seeing. Take photos of gas prices. Keep receipts. Record when stations run low on fuel or run out entirely. Post it on social media. Tag your representatives. Visibility creates political pressure. When enough people show evidence of a crisis, it becomes harder for officials to minimize or ignore. Seventh, plan contingency arrangements. If gas becomes unaffordable or unavailable, how will you get to work? How will your kids get to school? Do you have neighbors you can coordinate with? These conversations feel uncomfortable now, but they're critical before a crisis hits. Here's what we know for certain. California is losing 284,000 barrels per day of refining capacity over 15 months. Phillips 66 closed its Los Angeles refinery in October 2025. Valero will close its Benicia refinery by April 2026. That's 17% of the state's total refining capacity. After these closures, California will consume more gasoline than it produces. The state will depend on imported fuel traveling thousands of miles across oceans. California, that's a 75% increase from current prices. For context, California's average price in early 2026 is around $4.30 per gallon, an increase to $8 $43 means the average driver filling a 15-gallon tank pays $126 instead of $65. Small businesses that depend on transportation, delivery services, contractors, landscaping companies face margin compression. Some shut down. Rural communities with longer driving distances get hit hardest. People start carpooling out of necessity, not choice. Electric vehicle adoption accelerates, but not fast enough to reduce gasoline demand significantly in 12 months. Worst case scenario. A major refinery suffers an unplanned outage while Valero is offline. This isn't hypothetical. Chevron's El Segundo refinery experienced a fire in October 2025. Refinery fires, mechanical failures, and unplanned maintenance happen regularly in the industry. If one of California's remaining large refineries goes offline, even temporarily, while the state is already operating near capacity limits, gasoline shortages occur. Not price spikes, actual shortages. Gas stations run out of fuel, lines form, rationing gets discussed. Prices don't just hit $8 per gallon. Some analysts, including those cited by California Globe and repeated by Senate Minority Leader Brian Jones, have warned prices could reach $12 per gallon during acute shortage periods. $12 per gallon means $180 to fill a 15-gallon tank. At that price point, discretionary driving stops. People don't go to the movies. They don't drive to the beach. They calculate every trip. The economic impact radiates outward. Restaurants see fewer customers. Retail stores lose foot traffic. Tourism collapses. For historical precedent, look at the 2022 gas shortage in Mendocino County, where prices hit near $10 per gallon at isolated stations. Now imagine that statewide for weeks instead of days. The decisions made in the next 6 months will determine which scenario California experiences. If you live in California, here is what you need to monitor and how to prepare. First, track California Energy Commission announcements about refinery operations and fuel inventory levels. The CEC publishes weekly petroleum data. When inventory levels drop below normal ranges, prices spike within days. Subscribe to their email alerts. Knowledge gives you lead time. Second, calculate your household's gas